Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a tale from Renaissance Venice, but with something far more timeless and cutthroat. Hollywood in 1968. Because believe it or not, Shakespeare's story of debt and deception fits perfectly into an era of studio lots, blacklists, and borrowed money where love and revenge played out not in Italian merchant courts, but in Bel Air mansions and smoky offices above Fairfax Avenue. From auditions that test the soul to contracts signed in desperation, this is the Merchant of Venice reimagined, where the pound of flesh isn't literal, but the cost is just as devastating. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1968, and Hollywood Boulevard shimmers like a mirage beneath the California sun. Palm trees sway against a smog-hazed sky, their fronds casting shadows on sidewalks embedded with stars bearing forgotten names. This is Los Angeles at a crossroads, where the old guard of the studio system collides with the rebellion of a new generation, where suits and ties give way to turtlenecks and leather jackets, where the dream factory faces its own uncertain future. Antonio Rossini sits alone in his corner booth at Musso and Frank Grill, the legendary restaurant where deal makers have gathered since the silent era. He is 58 years old, his salt and pepper hair perfectly groomed in the style of an earlier Hollywood, his tailored Italian suit speaking of past glories. Before him sits an untouched martini, the olive speared and drowning. Through the window, he watches tourists photograph the Hollywood sign in the distant hills, that monument to promises both kept and broken. Antonio's weathered face carries the weight of 3 decades in the film industry, every wrinkle a testament to battles fought in boardrooms and on sound stages. He built his production company, Rossini Pictures, from nothing in the golden age after the war. He discovered stars, launched careers, produced films that made audiences weep and cheer. The framed photographs in his office tell the story. Antonio shaking hands with studio executives. Antonio on set with leading men and women whose faces once lit up marquees across America. Antonio accepting awards in elegant ballrooms, thick with cigarette smoke and champagne. But that was then, when Hollywood belonged to men like him, when the system made sense, when he knew the rules. Now, in this strange year of 1968, everything has changed. The studio system crumbles. Independent producers scramble for financing. Young directors fresh from film schools demand creative control and speak in French about auteur theory. The audiences want rebellion, want reality, want films that reflect the chaos in the streets, the war on television screens each night, the generation gap splitting families apart. Antonio's last 3 pictures lost money. The banks grow cold. His offices on the Paramount lot, once bustling with secretaries and assistants, now echo with emptiness. The door of Musso and Frank swings open, and Bassanio Drake enters with the energy of youth and desperation combined. He is 32, handsome in that new Hollywood way, his hair slightly longer than Antonio's generation would approve, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his corduroy jacket casual yet calculated. Bassanio moves through the restaurant with practiced charm, nodding to industry faces, his smile bright and automatic. He slides into the booth across from Antonio, and the older man's face softens with genuine affection. Bassanio is Antonio's protege, his discovery, perhaps even the son he never had. Antonio plucked him from obscurity 8 years ago, a struggling actor waiting tables on Sunset Strip, and gave him his first real role. When Bassanio showed more talent for producing than performing, Antonio mentored him, taught him the business, opened doors that would have remained locked. Their relationship transcends mere friendship or professional alliance. Antonio would do anything for this young man, and Bassanio knows it, which makes what he must ask today all the more difficult. They order, though neither has much appetite. Small talk fills the space between them, industry gossip delivered in hushed tones, a director fired mid-production, a starlet's breakdown, a studio merger. But beneath the surface conversation, tension builds. Bassanio fidgets with his water glass, clears his throat, looks everywhere except directly at Antonio. Finally, as their lunch arrives untouched, Bassanio speaks the truth he came to deliver. He has met someone. Her name is Portia Bellmont, and she is unlike anyone in this town of manufactured beauty and hollow glamour. Bassanio describes her with the passion of a man struck by lightning. Portia is 26, an actress of genuine talent, not just another pretty face reading lines. She studied at the Actors Studio in New York, learned her craft from the masters of method acting. 6 months ago, she returned to Los Angeles after her father's sudden death, and now she lives in the Bellmont estate in Bel Air, that sprawling mansion overlooking the city like a castle overlooking a medieval village. Her father, Marcus Bellmont, was a legendary director, one of the last great artists of Hollywood's golden age. He made films of substance and beauty, pictures that critics praised and audiences loved. He died wealthy, leaving Portia his fortune, his estate, his legacy in celluloid and memory. But Marcus Bellmont, eccentric to his final breath, crafted a will that Hollywood gossips discuss in whispers and disbelief. Marcus Bellmont's will stipulates that Portia cannot simply choose her own husband. Instead, any man who wishes to marry her must first pass a test, an audition of sorts conceived by the director in his final days, as if crafting one last film. 3 scenes, 3 interpretations, 3 chances to prove worthiness not through wealth or pedigree, but through artistic understanding and emotional truth. The suitors must come to the Bellmont estate, where Marcus's private screening room has been converted into a stage. There, before Portia and her late father's attorney, each man must perform. The first choice presents a scene from a big-budget Hollywood spectacular, all action and heroics, the kind of picture that makes millions at the box office. The second offers a scene from a European art film, obtuse and intellectual, the cinema that wins festivals and confounds mainstream audiences. The third presents a scene from a small, intimate character study, the type of independent film that captures raw human truth. Marcus Bellmont believed that a man's interpretation of these scenes would reveal his soul. Choose the Hollywood spectacle, and you prove yourself a fool chasing commercial glory without substance. Choose the pretentious art film, and you demonstrate hollow intellectualism without heart. But choose the intimate character piece, and you show wisdom, understanding that real art lives in honest human connection, not spectacle or pretension. Bassanio speaks of Portia with reverence bordering on worship. He has seen her only 3 times, always at industry parties in the Hollywood Hills, those gatherings where the counterculture mingles uneasily with the establishment. where rock music competes with cocktail jazz, where marijuana smoke drifts through rooms once filled only with tobacco and ambition. Each time they spoke briefly, and Bassanio felt something shift inside him, as if his whole life had been prologue to meeting this woman. But here lies the problem that brings Bassanio to Antonio's table with desperation in his eyes. To court Portia properly, to present himself as a worthy suitor, Bassanio needs money he does not have. His last producing credit was 2 years ago, a low-budget western that barely broke even. His apartment in Laurel Canyon costs more than he can afford. His car, a used Mustang, burns oil and threatens to die on Mulholland Drive. He lives on charm and credit, always 1 month from eviction, always juggling which bill to pay. To approach Portia Bellmont, he needs to look successful. He needs tailored clothes from the boutiques on Rodeo Drive, not worn jackets from second-hand shops. He needs to arrive at her estate in a car that doesn't embarrass him, perhaps a leased Continental, or at least something that doesn't announce his poverty. He needs to take her to dinner at Chasen's or Romanoff's, places where industry royalty dine on expense accounts and reputation. He needs, in short, to appear to be the man he wishes he was, rather than the man he has become. Bassanio estimates he requires $15,000 to mount his campaign for Portia's heart. $15,000 to transform himself, to buy the costume necessary for this most important role of his life. He speaks quickly now, words tumbling out, explaining his calculations. New wardrobe, $3,000. Car lease and insurance, $2,000. Dinners, gifts, entertainment, $4,000. An apartment befitting a successful producer, $6,000 for first, last, security, and furnishings. It sounds mercenary when listed like budget line items, but Bassanio swears it is not about deception. He simply needs the chance to show Portia who he truly is, and in Hollywood, appearance grants access to opportunity. Antonio listens with his characteristic patience, his dark eyes never leaving Bassanio's face. The older man understands the desperation of wanting something beyond reach. He recognizes the look of a man gambling everything on a single hope. And he loves Bassanio enough to want to help, to open his wallet as he has opened doors throughout their relationship. But Antonio faces his own crisis this brutal summer of '68. His production company teeters on bankruptcy's edge. 3 films currently shoot on locations scattered across the globe. A war picture in the Philippines, a western in Mexico, an adventure film in Morocco. Antonio invested everything in these productions, believing the films would restore his reputation and fortune. The movies will not complete for months, and until then every dollar Antonio possesses is locked in those distant productions, converted to film stock and set construction, actor salaries, and crew wages. Antonio's bank accounts run dry, his credit exhausted, his assets tied up in projects that may succeed brilliantly or fail catastrophically. He owns nothing liquid, nothing available to simply hand to Bassanio. The irony cuts deep. Antonio, once wealthy enough to finance films on a handshake, now cannot spare $15,000 to help the person he cares for most. Bassanio's face falls as Antonio explains his situation. Hope drains away, replaced by resignation. He begins to apologize for asking, for burdening Antonio with his problems. But Antonio raises a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Where there is will, there is way, the old producer says. They will find the money somewhere. Antonio still has reputation, still has connections, still has one avenue he has never before pursued. Solomon Shylock operates from an office on Fairfax Avenue, far from the glamorous studio lots and agency towers of Beverly Hills. His building sits in a neighborhood where Jewish delicatessens serve pastrami to elderly immigrants, where Hebrew letters mark shop windows, where the community remembers what it means to be excluded from certain clubs and certain tables. Shylock's office occupies the second floor above a bookstore specializing in Yiddish literature. No receptionist greets visitors. No framed movie posters decorate the walls. Just a desk, filing cabinets, a typewriter gathering dust, and photographs of a life that ended 17 years ago. Solomon Shylock was once one of Hollywood's finest screenwriters. His scripts in the late 40s and early 50s earned critical acclaim and box office success. He wrote sophisticated comedies and searing dramas with equal skill. His dialogue sparkled. His characters breathed. Directors fought to work with him. Studios paid premium rates for his talents. Then came 1951, and the House Un-American Activities Committee arrived in Hollywood like an invading army, demanding loyalty oaths and naming names. Shylock refused to testify, refused to inform on colleagues and friends. They blacklisted him, erased his name from credits, made him unemployable in the industry he had served with his artistry. For years he wrote under pseudonyms, selling scripts through intermediaries for a fraction of their worth, watching other men accept awards for his words. Eventually, even that avenue closed. The blacklist was thorough, and those who administered it had long memories. So Shylock reinvented himself as a private financier, lending money to the very industry that exiled him. He charges interest, always. He operates within the law, barely. Desperate producers, directors gambling on passion projects, actors trying to option material, they come to Shylock when banks refuse them, when their studio deals collapse, when they need cash quickly and quietly. He has money now more than he earned as a screenwriter, but it brings no satisfaction, no redemption, only the bitter taste of survival. Antonio Rossini and Solomon Shylock have history stretching back to those dark days of the blacklist. Antonio was rising then, establishing his production company, making his first successful films. When the committees came hunting communists and fellow travelers, Antonio did not stand with the victims. He did not add his name to petitions or defend the accused. He remained silent, protected his career, made calculations about survival that haunted him in quiet moments, but did not prevent his success. More than silence, though, Antonio once actively undermined Shylock. In 1953, Antonio was attached to direct a film from an anonymous script that he knew, through industry whispers, came from Shylock's banned typewriter. Antonio could have proceeded, could have made the film, and given Shylock at least the money and satisfaction of seeing his words performed. Instead, Antonio withdrew from the project, telling the producer he could not risk association with blacklisted material. The film died. Shylock lost both the payment he desperately needed and the chance to see his art reach audiences. Now, on this afternoon in 1968, Antonio climbs the narrow stairs to Shylock's office, each step an acknowledgement of how far he has fallen, how completely circumstances reverse. He knocks on the frosted glass door, and Shylock's voice, sharp and suspicious, calls him inside. Shylock sits behind his desk, 65 years old, his face lined with hard years and harder memories. He wears an ordinary suit, nothing tailored or expensive, a working man's armor. His gray hair recedes from a high forehead, and his dark eyes intelligent, wounded, cynical fix on Antonio with an expression mixing surprise and something darker, something that might be satisfaction at seeing his old enemy humbled. Antonio explains his situation with directness bordering on desperation. He needs $15,000 immediately. His assets are solid but frozen in current productions. In 6 months, perhaps 8, the films will complete and generate revenue. Antonio offers to pay 20% interest terms per a short-term loan. He speaks of Bassanio only obliquely, protecting the young man's privacy, framing the loan as a business necessity. Shylock listens without interruption, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Antonio finishes, silence fills the small office, broken only by street noise filtering through the window, the sounds of traffic and distant radios, the city conducting its indifferent business. Finally, Shylock speaks, his voice carrying the cadences of education and old pain. He reminds Antonio of their history. He lists the slights and betrayals, the silence when words were needed, the withdrawal from the film project that could have provided both income and artistic satisfaction. Shylock speaks without raising his voice, but each word lands like an accusation, each memory a stone added to a scale measuring debts that have nothing to do with money. Antonio absorbs this verbal assault without defending himself. What defense exists? He did what Shylock accuses him of doing. He chose pragmatism over principle, career over courage. Antonio can only say that he asks not for himself, but to help someone he loves, someone innocent of the old sins. Shylock considers this. Then he makes an offer that freezes the air in the cramped office. He will lend the $15,000 with no interest whatsoever. Nothing. Zero. A completely interest-free loan, to be repaid in 8 months when Antonio's films complete. The generosity seems impossible, a trap disguised as a gift. But there is a condition, Shylock continues, a strange condition, a forfeit clause should Antonio fail to repay on time. If 8 months pass and Antonio cannot return the $15,000, Shylock will claim not money but something else, complete ownership of Rossini Pictures, the production company Antonio built, his legacy in Hollywood, his name on the door. Everything Antonio has created in 3 decades will become Shylock's property, to operate or liquidate as he sees fit. Antonio stares at Shylock, trying to read the older man's intention. Is this revenge disguised as mercy, or simply a calculated risk? One blacklisted screenwriter betting against a failing producer? Shylock's expression reveals nothing, his face a mask of neutrality. Antonio considers his options. He can refuse, walk away, tell Bassanio the money cannot be found. Or he can accept, confident that his 3 films will succeed, that in 8 months he will repay easily, and Shylock's strange condition will never matter. The films are good, Antonio believes. They will find audiences. The money will come. For Bassanio, for love, for the chance to give happiness to someone who matters, Antonio extends his hand across Shylock's desk. They shake, and the deal is made. In this small office above a bookstore on Fairfax Avenue, 2 men seal a bargain that will determine both their futures. Antonio leaves with a check for $15,000 and a contract carrying the weight of everything he has built. Outside, the California sun still shines on Hollywood Boulevard, indifferent to the dramas playing out in shabby offices and desperate hearts. The dream factory continues its work, manufacturing illusions, and Antonio Rossini walks toward his car, carrying both hope and the seed of his possible destruction. The Bellmont estate rises from the Bel Air hills, like a monument to old Hollywood elegance. A sprawling Mediterranean villa with white stucco walls and terracotta roof tiles, surrounded by manicured lawns and gardens where jasmine perfumes the air. Wrought iron gates guard the long driveway lined with cypress trees. A fountain splashes in the circular courtyard, its water catching sunlight and throwing rainbows across marble. This is wealth that whispers rather than shouts, the accumulated fortune of a man who spent 40 years turning celluloid and light into art and profit. Inside, Portia Bellmont stands before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the library, gazing down at Los Angeles sprawling toward the Pacific Ocean. She wears simple elegance, a cream-colored shift dress and minimal jewelry, her dark hair falling straight to her shoulders in the modern style. At 26, Portia possesses the kind of beauty that cameras worship. But more than that, she carries intelligence in her eyes, an awareness that she exists as more than ornament or prize. Beside her stands Nerissa Chun, her closest friend and confidant, the daughter of Marcus Beaumont's longtime cinematographer. Nerissa, 24, wears bell-bottom jeans and a paisley blouse, her long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. She works as Portia's assistant and companion, but their relationship transcends employer and employee. They grew up together in this world of Hollywood privilege, two daughters of the industry, understanding both its magic and its machinery. Portia speaks with frustration and dark humor about the parade of suitors her father's bizarre will has attracted. For 3 months now, men have come to audition for her hand, as if she were a role to be won rather than a person to be known. The circus her life has become would be laughable if it were not so suffocating. Yesterday, a television action star arrived in his custom Corvette, all swagger and white teeth, his tan deep and artificial. He chose the Hollywood spectacular scene, naturally, performing with exaggerated heroics, striking poses, delivering lines like he was shouting over explosions. He expected applause. Instead, Portia thanked him politely and had Nerissa show him out. The man actually seemed confused by his failure, unable to comprehend that muscles and charisma do not equal understanding. Last week brought a European director, a German expatriate with round spectacles and affected intellectualism. He smoked Turkish cigarettes in a long holder and spoke endlessly about Godard and Bergman, about cinema as philosophy, about the death of narrative. He chose the art film scene and performed it as incomprehensible abstraction, all affected pauses and meaningless gestures. Portia nearly laughed during his performance, but maintained composure. Nerissa had less restraint, covering her mouth to hide her smirk. The fortune hunters come, too, men who see only her inheritance, who stumble through their chosen scenes with transparent desperation. Sons of fading producers, aging actors hoping to marry into renewed relevance, businessmen who view Portia as acquisition rather than person. She rejects them all with polite finality, and they leave her estate bitter, confused, or indifferent. Portia confesses to Nerissa that she feels trapped by her father's final directive. She loved Marcus Bellmont deeply, revered his artistic vision, mourned his death with genuine grief. But this test he created feels like control from beyond the grave, one last directorial decision imposed upon her life. She cannot simply refuse to participate. The will's terms are clear. If she rejects the challenge entirely, Her inheritance transfers to various charities after 2 years. She would be left with nothing, cast out from the only home she has known. Yet Portia also understands her father's intention, twisted though the execution may be. Marcus Bellmont watched too many of his friends and colleagues marry poorly, attracted to beauty without substance, wealth without character, fame without wisdom. He wanted to ensure his daughter found someone who understood what truly mattered, who could distinguish between surface and depth, spectacle and truth. The audition test was meant as protection, a filter against the shallow men who populate Hollywood like extras in a crowd scene. Larissa suggests they need a break from the audition parade, perhaps a drive down to the beach, dinner in Santa Monica where they can watch the sunset, and pretend to be ordinary young women without famous fathers and complicated inheritances. But before they can escape, the doorbell echoes through the mansion's halls. Another suitor, unexpected but announced by the estate's longtime butler, Edward. This visitor is different from the others. Gregory Callahan arrives in a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that costs more than most people earn in months. He is 45, a studio executive at Paramount, a man who controls which films get made and which die in development. Power radiates from him like heat from asphalt in August. His silver hair is styled precisely. His handshake when he greets Portia is calculated to convey confidence without aggression. Callahan speaks smoothly about his admiration for Marcus Bellmont, dropping casual anecdotes about their professional relationship, reminding Portia that he greenlit 2 of her father's final films. He moves through the estate with proprietary comfort, as if already imagining himself master of this house. His eyes assess everything, the paintings, the furniture, the view, and Portia herself, all inventory to be evaluated. When Portia leads him to the screening room, converted for these auditions, Callahan surveys the 3 scene options with barely concealed calculation. The room itself was Marcus Bellmont's sanctuary, a private theater with 20 plush seats, a professional projector, and acoustic panels ensuring perfect sound. Now it serves as stage for this strange ritual. Callahan chooses the Hollywood spectacular scene, but he performs it with subtle irony, a knowing wink to the audience, suggesting he understands the scene's emptiness even as he delivers it with professional competence. He plays the game while simultaneously commenting on it, a meta-performance meant to demonstrate sophistication, but Portia sees through the technique. This is a man who believes cleverness substitutes for genuine feeling, who thinks he can game any system through strategic thinking. When he finishes and looks to her for approval, Portia delivers her judgment with icy politeness. She thanks him for his time and interest, but he is not what she seeks. The rejection lands hard. Men like Gregory Callahan rarely hear the word no, especially from women young enough to be their daughters. Callahan's face darkens with wounded pride. He stands in the screening room, his expensive suit suddenly seeming like costume rather than armor. For a moment, something ugly flickers across his features, a glimpse of the ruthless executive beneath the polished surface. He suggests, with careful menace disguised as friendly advice, that Portia should reconsider. A young woman in Hollywood needs allies, needs friends in positions of power. Her father's reputation can only protect her so far, and memories fade quickly in this town. Portia meets his veiled threat with steady composure. She reminds Callahan that her father's will includes legal protections, that her inheritance cannot be manipulated or stolen through studio politics. She thanks him again for coming, her tone making clear the conversation has ended. Nerissa appears at the screening room door, as if summoned by telepathy, ready to escort the rejected suitor out. Callahan leaves, but his departure feels less like exit than strategic retreat. Men like him do not forget humiliation. They collect slights and perceived insults, store them away, wait for opportunities to balance scales. As his Rolls-Royce glides down the long driveway, Portia feels a chill, despite the warm California evening. She has made an enemy today, added another complication to her already complicated existence. That night, Portia and Nerissa sit on the terrace overlooking the city lights spreading like fallen stars across the Los Angeles basin. They drink wine from her father's cellar, an expensive Bordeaux Marcus Belmont had been saving for special occasions that will never come. The jasmine-scented air carries sounds of distant traffic, someone's party in a neighboring estate, a dog barking in the canyons. Portia speaks of her father with the complex mixture of love and frustration that daughters of great men often carry. Marcus Belmont was brilliant, visionary, dedicated to his art with monastic devotion. But that devotion left little room for ordinary life, for being present at school plays and birthday parties, for teaching his daughter to drive or offering advice about boys. He loved her, Portia knows this absolutely, but he loved cinema more, or at least more consistently. After her mother died when Portia was 12, Marcus buried himself deeper into his work. Films became his escape, his therapy, his reason for existing. Portia was raised by nannies and housekeepers, educated in expensive private schools, provided every material comfort, except the one thing she truly needed, her father's time and attention. Now he has died and left her one final direction to follow, one last test to pass, and she must comply or lose everything. Nerissa listens with the patience of someone who has heard these thoughts before, but knows they need repeated expression, like prayers or mantras. She offers what comfort she can, reminding Portia that the right man will come eventually, someone who sees past the money and the test and the dead father's wishes to the actual woman, waiting beneath all those complications. Across the city, in his Laurel Canyon apartment, Bassanio Drake counts the cash Antonio gave him, $15,000 in a manila envelope, more money than he has held in years. The bills feel like possibility, like transformation, like a chance to become someone worthy of Portia Bellmont's consideration. He sits on his worn couch beneath a Jimi Hendrix poster, the apartment's windows open to the night air and the sound of folk music drifting from a neighbor's guitar. Bassanio's roommate, Lorenzo Paz, watches with amusement and concern. Lorenzo is 28, a struggling screenwriter who pays rent by working construction jobs, a Mexican-American kid from East L.A. who fought his way into the industry's margins through talent and stubborn determination. He and Bassanio have been friends since film school at UCLA, two outsiders trying to crack Hollywood's gates. Lorenzo questions the wisdom of Bassanio's plan. Spending 15,000 borrowed dollars to pursue a woman seems like desperation rather than romance. What if Portia rejects him? What if he fails the audition test? What if she sees through the expensive costume to the broke producer underneath? Bassanio will be left with nothing except debt to Antonio and crushed dreams. But Bassanio speaks with the conviction of a man who has found his purpose. He describes Portia with romantic intensity, recalling every detail of their brief encounters. The way she listened when he spoke at a party in the Hollywood Hills, genuinely interested rather than scanning the room for more important connections. The intelligence in her eyes, the quick wit in her responses, the sense that she really saw him, not just another ambitious climber in a city full of climbers. Bassanio admits he has been adrift these past few years, taking meetings that lead nowhere, developing projects that never get financed, living on charm and fading connections. Meeting Portia felt like waking from sleepwalking, like suddenly having direction and purpose. If he can win her, if he can pass her father's test, his whole life will mean something. He will become the man he has always known he could be. Lorenzo recognizes the futility of arguing with romantic obsession. Instead, he offers to help. As a screenwriter, Lorenzo understands dramatic scenes and emotional truth. He can coach Bassanio, help him prepare for the audition, analyze the 3 scene choices, and determine which one reveals the wisdom Portia seeks. Together they can treat this like preparing for the most important role of Bassanio's life. The 2 friends spend the night strategizing, drinking cheap beer, debating Marcus Belmont's intentions. What did the legendary director truly value? What would he want for his daughter? Lorenzo argues that the intimate character piece is obviously the correct choice, the scene revealing understanding of human complexity. But how should Bassanio perform it? With naturalistic simplicity? With method acting intensity? With classical theatrical skill? Bassanio practices different approaches, running lines while Lorenzo critiques and suggests adjustments. The hours pass, and their voices grow hoarse from repetition and discussion. By dawn, Bassanio feels prepared, or as prepared as desperation and borrowed money can make him. He will spend Antonio's $15,000 wisely, transform himself into someone who appears successful enough to warrant Portia's attention, then trust that his genuine feelings will carry him through the audition. Meanwhile, in her Bel Air mansion, Portia lies awake in her childhood bedroom, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. She thinks about the parade of failed suitors, about her father's impossible test, about the future stretching before her like unmarked road through unfamiliar territory. Somewhere in Los Angeles, she allows herself to hope. There must be a man who possesses both the wisdom to choose correctly and the heart to love her truly. Perhaps tomorrow he will ring her doorbell. Perhaps he already walks the same streets she walks, breathes the same smog-thick air, dreams beneath the same indifferent stars. The transformation of Bassanio Drake begins on Rodeo Drive, where boutiques display fashions behind gleaming windows, like art in galleries. He enters a men's shop that caters to directors and leading men, where salespeople recognize success by instinct and smell money like bloodhounds. The tailor measures him for 3 suits, Italian wool in modern cuts, narrow lapels and trim silhouettes that signal the new Hollywood aesthetic. Shirts in subtle colors, ties in thin widths, leather shoes from Rome. The clothes feel like armor, each piece carefully selected to project confidence and achievement. Next comes the car, a leased Lincoln Continental in midnight blue, its chrome gleaming, its leather interior smelling of luxury and possibility. Bassanio signs papers at a dealership in Beverly Hills, commits to monthly payments that terrify him, and drives away feeling like he has stolen something precious. The car handles smoothly on Sunset Boulevard, and other drivers regard him differently now, with respect rather than contempt. He rents a new apartment in West Hollywood, A furnished one-bedroom in a modern building with a pool and a view, the kind of place where young executives and successful actors live. The rent consumes a shocking portion of Antonio's loan, but appearance matters in Hollywood more than authenticity. Bassanio needs an address that does not embarrass him, a place where he can invite Portia, if circumstances allow. With Lorenzo's help, Bassanio prepares his approach. They craft a letter of introduction to Portia, written on expensive stationery, expressing his desire to attempt her father's challenge. The letter balances confidence with humility, makes reference to Marcus Belmont's films with genuine appreciation rather than empty flattery. Lorenzo's screenwriting skills shape every sentence, every word choice calculated for effect. On Fairfax Avenue, in a small apartment above the neighborhood where her father conducts his cold business, Jessica Shylock stares at her reflection in a cracked mirror and sees a prisoner looking back. She is 23 years old, beautiful in an unconventional way, her dark eyes holding depths of longing and frustration. She dresses in the fashion of young rebellion, miniskirts and bold patterns, her hair teased high, her makeup dramatic. But these clothes feel like costume, disguise worn to hide her true captivity. Solomon Shylock keeps his daughter close, protected and controlled in equal measure. He permits her no independence, no freedom to explore the city beyond their neighborhood, no opportunity to build a life separate from his bitterness and isolation. Jessica works as his assistant, filing papers, managing accounts, answering phones that rarely ring. Her father treats her with affection, but also with suffocating possession, as if she is his last treasure in a world that stole everything else. Jessica knows her father's history, understands the blacklist's cruelty, and the industry's betrayal. She sympathizes with his pain but refuses to let it become her own. She did not choose his enemies. She committed no sins requiring this endless penance. Yet Solomon Shylock cannot separate his daughter from his losses. He sees her as all he has left, the only thing Hollywood could not take from him, and he guards her jealously. In secret, Jessica meets with Lorenzo Paz, Bassanio's roommate and closest friend. They encountered each other 3 months ago at a coffee house on the Sunset Strip, one of those dark caves where poets read and folk singers play, where young people gathered to discuss revolution and art and futures different from their parents' paths. Lorenzo was immediately struck by Jessica, this beautiful woman who seemed both present and absent, engaged and trapped. They began talking, and Jessica confessed her situation with the relief of finally finding someone who would listen without judgment. Lorenzo, who understands family complications and cultural expectations, offered friendship without demands. Their meetings became regular, stolen afternoons when Solomon Shylock believed his daughter was running errands or attending secretarial classes he insisted she take. Lorenzo and Jessica walk through Griffith Park on a Wednesday afternoon, following trails that climb into the hills overlooking the city. They talk about everything except the impossibility of their situation. Lorenzo speaks of his screenplays, the stories he wants to tell about characters who never see themselves on movie screens, Mexican-American families and working-class struggles. Jessica describes the books she reads in secret, novels her father would disapprove of, stories about women who escape and transform and claim their own destinies. What grows between them is more than attraction, though attraction certainly exists. It is recognition, two people who understand, feeling trapped by circumstances beyond their control, by family histories and societal expectations. Lorenzo does not push. does not demand Jessica rebel or run away. He simply offers her something she has never had: choice, the knowledge that alternatives exist beyond her father's apartment and bitter worldview. Jessica confesses that she dreams of leaving, of finding her own apartment, getting a real job, living as other young women in 1968 live, with independence and possibility. But her father controls the money, controls access to everything. She has no savings, no resources beyond what Solomon Shylock permits. And beneath her frustration lies guilt, the knowledge that her father loves her, that abandoning him would inflict pain on a man who has already suffered too much. Lorenzo suggests, gently, that loving someone does not require surrendering your own life to their trauma. Jessica can honor her father's past while still claiming her future. But how? What mechanism of escape exists for a young woman with no money and a father who watches her every movement? As they stand on a hilltop, looking down at Los Angeles sprawling beneath them in the afternoon haze, Lorenzo makes an offer that frightens and thrills Jessica equally. He knows people, has connections, can help her find work and a place to live if she decides to leave. It would not be glamorous, probably a waitressing job and a shared apartment in Echo Park or Silver Lake, but it would be hers, chosen rather than imposed. Jessica does not answer immediately. The decision feels too enormous, too final. To leave would mean breaking her father's heart, confirming his belief that everyone eventually betrays him, adding her name to the list of those who caused him pain. But to stay means slowly disappearing, becoming a ghost haunting her father's bitterness, never knowing who she might have been. Across town, Bassanio Drake sits in his new apartment, wearing one of his new suits, holding the letter to Portia Bellmont. Outside his window, the sun sets over Hollywood, painting the smog orange and purple, transforming pollution into temporary beauty. Tomorrow he will deliver the letter to the Bellmont estate. Tomorrow he will begin his campaign to win the woman who has become his obsession and his hope. Antonio Rossini calls to check on Bassanio, his voice warm with paternal concern. The older producer asks no questions about how the money will be spent, demands no accounting or justification. He simply wants to know that Bassanio is well, that the young man he loves like a son has what he needs to pursue his happiness. Bassanio thanks him with genuine emotion, promises that the sacrifice will not be wasted. He will make Antonio proud. He will succeed. Neither man mentions the deal with Shylock, the strange contract hanging over Antonio's future, like a sword suspended by thread. Both prefer to believe that everything will work out, that the 3 films in production will succeed, that 8 months from now the debt will be paid easily, and the forfeit clause will remain theoretical rather than real. Hope in Hollywood always feels more reliable than reality, at least until the box office returns prove otherwise. Bassanio Drake arrives at the Bellmont estate on a Tuesday morning in late August, when the Los Angeles heat shimmers off the asphalt and the Santa Ana winds blow hot from the desert. His leased Continental purrs up the long driveway, past the cypress trees standing like sentinels, past the fountain throwing water into the air where it catches light and falls back in endless cycles. He wears one of his new suits, charcoal gray with a narrow tie, his hair freshly cut, his confidence assembled from borrowed money and desperate hope. Edward, the elderly butler who has served the Bellmont family for 30 years, greets him at the door with formal courtesy. The old man's face reveals nothing, though he has witnessed dozens of suitors arrive with similar confidence and depart with crushed expectations. He leads Bassanio through the mansion's halls, past walls hung with photographs from Marcus Belmont's films, past awards displayed in glass cases, past the accumulated evidence of a life dedicated to cinematic art. Portia waits in the library, sunlight streaming through the tall windows behind her, making her appear almost ethereal, backlit like a film star in a carefully composed shot. She wears a simple navy dress, her dark hair pulled back, minimal makeup emphasizing rather than concealing her natural beauty. Nerissa stands nearby, clipboard in hand, playing her role as assistant and observer, though her keen eyes miss nothing. Bassanio introduces himself with the careful balance Lorenzo helped him rehearse, confident but not arrogant, passionate but not desperate. He speaks briefly about his admiration for Marcus Belmont's work, citing specific films and moments that moved him. This is not empty flattery. Bassanio genuinely loved Belmont's cinema. The way the director could capture human complexity in a single frame, the way his films trusted audiences to understand nuance and ambiguity. Portia responds with cautious interest. She has learned to recognize insincerity, developed radar for the fortune hunters and fame seekers. But something in Bassanio's manner intrigues her, a quality she cannot immediately name. Perhaps it is the nervous energy beneath his composure, the sense that this matters to him beyond the money and the challenge, that he has bet everything on this moment. They talk for 20 minutes in the library, conversation flowing more naturally than the formal situation should allow. Bassanio asks about Portia's own work as an actress, and she describes her training in New York, the difference between stage and screen, her desire to find roles with substance rather than simply playing beautiful women in forgettable films. Bassanio listens genuinely, asks follow-up questions that demonstrate real interest, and Portia finds herself relaxing slightly, allowing the possibility that this suitor might be different from the parade of disappointments. Eventually, though, the audition must begin. Nerissa leads them to the screening room where Marcus Belmont's test awaits. The room feels sacred, a temple to cinema, its walls absorbing decades of projected light and sound. The 3 scene options are displayed on cards: the Hollywood spectacular, the European art film, the intimate character piece. Bassanio studies them carefully, though he and Lorenzo already analyzed these choices for hours, debating implications and meanings. Bassanio chooses the intimate character piece, as Lorenzo predicted he would, as wisdom dictates. The scene comes from an obscure independent film Marcus Belmont admired, a 2-person drama about a father and son attempting reconciliation after years of estrangement. The scene requires emotional honesty, vulnerability, the courage to drop protective masks and reveal genuine feeling. Portia reads opposite him, taking the father's role, while Bassanio performs the son. As they begin, something unexpected happens. The rehearsed performance Bassanio practiced with Lorenzo falls away, replaced by something raw and real. Perhaps it is Portia's presence, the way she inhabits the father's role with such naturalistic grace. Perhaps it is the scene itself, touching nerves in Bassanio's own complicated relationship with his late father. Perhaps it is simply the accumulated pressure of everything riding on this moment. Bassanio's voice cracks when the son confesses his loneliness, his feeling of never being good enough, never measuring up to expectations. Tears gather in his eyes, authentic rather than performed, and when he delivers the final line, a simple statement of love despite all disappointments, the Emotion in the room becomes palpable, real, shared. Portia finds herself moved in ways she did not anticipate. She has watched men perform this same scene with technical competence, with actorly craft, but never with this kind of naked honesty. Bassanio has somehow transformed the audition into genuine human connection, stripped away the artifice to reveal something true and vulnerable beneath. When the scene ends, silence fills the screening room, heavy and significant. Nerissa, who watches from the back row, realizes she is holding her breath. Portia looks at Bassanio with new eyes, seeing past the expensive suit and confident exterior to the complicated, hopeful, frightened man underneath. This is what her father wanted, she understands suddenly. Not technical skill or intellectual sophistication, but emotional courage, the willingness to be truly seen. Portia does not make him wait or wonder. She tells him he has chosen wisely, performed beautifully, passed her father's test with unexpected grace. Relief washes over Bassanio's face, followed by joy so pure it seems to illuminate the screening room like house lights coming up after a powerful film. He wants to embrace Portia, but restrains himself, aware of propriety and the newness of their connection. They return to the library, where the atmosphere has transformed from formal evaluation to tentative celebration. Portia pours champagne from her father's collection, and they toast to wisdom and courage, to her father's memory and their uncertain future. Nerissa excuses herself, sensing the two need privacy to navigate this new territory. Portia and Bassanio talk for hours, the conversation flowing from topic to topic with the ease of recognition, two people discovering they speak the same language despite their different backgrounds. Bassanio tells her about his struggles in Hollywood, his failures and frustrations, and finds that honesty does not repel her, but instead draws her closer. Portia describes the isolation of her father's fame, the burden of inherited wealth, the loneliness of being desired for everything except who she actually is. As afternoon fades to evening, Portia makes a decision that surprises even herself. She asks Bassanio to stay for dinner, to continue their conversation beyond the formal requirements of her father's test. Something about this man feels right, feels real in a way nothing has felt since her father's death left her adrift in the mansion full of memories and expectations. Over dinner on the terrace, with the city lights beginning to sparkle below and the jasmine releasing its evening perfume, Portia speaks with uncharacteristic openness about her fears and hopes. She admits she worried her father's test would attract only opportunists or fools, that she might be forced to choose between loneliness and settling for someone inadequate. Finding Bassanio feels like unexpected grace, like the universe offering a gift she did not know she deserved. Bassanio listens with growing emotion, torn between joy at her words and guilt at his deception. The expensive suit, the leased car, the new apartment, all the trappings of success that granted him access to this moment are built on borrowed money and manufactured appearance. He is not the successful producer Portia might imagine, but a struggling nobody who gambled everything on winning her. Should he confess? Should he reveal the truth and risk losing her before they truly begin? But looking at Portia in the candlelight, seeing the hope in her eyes, feeling the connection building between them, Bassanio cannot bring himself to shatter the moment with brutal honesty. He tells himself there will be time for truth later, after their relationship solidifies, after she knows him well enough to see past the financial struggles to the man beneath. For now, he allows her to believe what she wishes to believe. As the evening concludes, Portia does something that carries enormous significance in her world and his. She removes a ring from her finger, a silver band set with a simple sapphire, and offers it to Bassanio. This ring belonged to her mother, she explains, and her father gave it to Portia on her 18th birthday, with instructions to give it to the man she would marry. The ring represents commitment, trust, a promise of futures intertwined. Portia asks only one thing, that Bassanio never remove the ring, never give it away, never lose it. The ring symbolizes their bond, and its loss would signify the breaking of trust between them. Bassanio accepts the ring with solemn reverence, slipping it onto his finger, where it fits perfectly, as if made for him. He swears he will wear it always, guard it as he guards his own life. Let nothing separate him from this tangible proof of Portia's faith. They kiss for the first time as the stars emerge over Los Angeles, a kiss that feels like sealing a contract, written in hope rather than law. When Bassanio finally leaves the Bellmont estate, driving down the long driveway in his leased Continental, he feels transformed, as if he has become in reality what he only pretended to be, as if love has alchemy enough to turn costume into truth. He drives immediately to Antonio's modest office on the Paramount lot, bursting through the door with news of his success. Antonio looks up from paperwork detailing cost overruns on his Mexican Western, his weathered face tired and worried. But Bassanio's joy proves infectious. The older producer embraces him with paternal pride, genuinely delighted that the borrowed money achieved its purpose, that Bassanio has found the happiness he sought. Antonio asks about Portia, wanting to know everything, and Bassanio describes her with the eloquence of a man utterly transformed by love. She is brilliant, beautiful, kind, everything he imagined and more. The audition, the test, the challenge, all of it fades to insignificance compared to the simple fact of connection, recognition, two souls finding each other in a city of 8 million strangers. But Antonio's happiness for Bassanio mingles with private anxiety he cannot share. News from his 3 productions grows increasingly troubling. The war film in the Philippines faces monsoon delays and budget overruns. The Western in Mexico suffers from a director losing control, actors feuding, script problems requiring expensive reshoots. The Moroccan adventure film encounters political complications, permits revoked, shooting locations suddenly unavailable. Each telegram Antonio receives brings worse news, and the 8-month deadline for repaying Shylock approaches with terrifying speed. 4 months have already passed. In 4 more months, Antonio must return $15,000 plus whatever it cost to complete the troubled productions. If the films fail commercially, if they cannot recoup their investments, Antonio will lose everything to Shylock's strange forfeit clause. But Antonio reveals none of this to Bassanio. The young man has finally found happiness, and Antonio will not burden him with worries he cannot solve. Instead, Antonio smiles, pours 2 glasses of whiskey from the bottle in his desk drawer, and toasts to love and courage, to Portia and Bassanio, to futures bright with promise. Across the city, in the small apartment on Fairfax Avenue, Jessica Shylock makes her own life-changing decision. She packs a single suitcase with clothes and a few precious possessions, moving quietly while her father works late in his office below. She leaves a letter on the kitchen table, words carefully chosen to explain without wounding, though she knows pain is inevitable. The letter tells Solomon Shylock that she loves him, honors his struggles, understands his suffering. But she cannot live his bitterness as her own. She must find her own path, make her own mistakes, build a life that belongs to her rather than being defined by his history. She asks for his forgiveness and his blessing, though she takes neither for granted. Lorenzo waits outside in his battered Volkswagen van, engine running, ready to help Jessica escape into her own life. When she emerges from the building, suitcase in hand, her face shows equal parts terror and exhilaration. Lorenzo takes her bag, asks if she is certain, receives a fierce nod in response. They drive into the Los Angeles night, leaving Fairfax Avenue behind, heading toward the uncertain freedom of new beginnings. Jessica carries with her something she did not mention in her letter: several $1,000s in cash from her father's safe, money she tells herself she has earned through years of unpaid labor, money that will help her survive until she finds work and independence. Taking it feels like theft and justice simultaneously, and the contradiction weighs on her conscience, even as the money provides necessary escape. Solomon Shylock discovers Jessica's absence just after midnight, climbing the stairs to the apartment above his office, exhausted from reviewing loan documents and calculating interest rates. He calls her name in the dark hallway, receiving only silence in response. Her bedroom door stands open, unusual for this hour, and when he switches on the light, he sees the emptiness immediately. Closet half empty, dresser drawers pulled out. The absence of her presence like a physical wound. He finds the letter on the kitchen table, and reading it feels like reliving every betrayal he has endured, every loss compounded into one devastating moment. His daughter, his only child, the single pure thing remaining in his bitter life, has left him. The words she wrote, meant to soften the blow, only sharpen it. She loves him but cannot stay. She honors him but must go. The language of abandonment, dressed in kindness, cuts deeper than honest cruelty. Then Shylock opens his office safe to find the cash missing. Several $1,000s vanished with his vanished daughter, and something inside him breaks completely. Jessica did not simply leave. She stole from him, took his money as price for her freedom, reduced the relationship to transaction. The betrayal transcends mere abandonment. It becomes confirmation of everything Shylock believes about human nature, about trust rewarded with treachery, about love answered with theft. He staggers through his small office, rage and grief warring inside him, making sounds that might be weeping or might be animal howls. Everything he survived, the blacklist, the exile from his art, the years of humiliation and isolation, he survived for Jessica, to provide for her, to protect her from the cruelty he experienced. And she repays him by running away with his money, presumably with some boy, some smooth-talking opportunist who will use her and discard her when something better appears. Shylock's mind, always calculating, always strategic, begins working even through his anguish. He makes phone calls, contacts people in his network of creditors and information brokers, determines that Jessica was seen with Lorenzo Paz, that Mexican screenwriter who associates with Bassanio Drake, who is connected to Antonio Rossini. The connections form a chain, and Shylock follows it link by link until he sees the pattern. Antonio's loan financed Bassanio's pursuit of Portia Bellmont. Bassanio's friend Lorenzo seduced and stole Jessica. They are all connected, all part of the same circle that excluded Shylock, that uses him for money while despising him as a person. The old wounds reopen, and new hatred pours into them like acid. Shylock pulls out the contract Antonio signed, studies the forfeit clause he included almost as dark joke, never truly expecting to invoke it. 8 months or Antonio loses his production company. 4 months have already elapsed. 4 months remain. Shylock begins making inquiries about Antonio's current projects, calling contacts in the Philippines, Mexico, Morocco. What he learns brings grim satisfaction to his broken heart. Antonio's 3 films spiral toward disaster. The war picture in the Philippines has blown through its budget, with the director demanding additional funds to complete sequences already shot inadequately. The Mexican Western faces potential shutdown as the director and lead actor refuse to work together, each threatening to abandon the production. The Moroccan adventure film encounters legal troubles, with the government threatening to confiscate equipment over permit violations. Industry insiders whisper that Antonio Rossini is finished, that his gamble failed, that he will lose everything. The sharks smell blood in the water and circle, waiting to pick apart his company's assets when bankruptcy arrives. But Shylock holds a contract that supersedes all other claims, a legal document granting him complete ownership of Rossini Pictures if Antonio cannot repay the loan in 4 months. For the first time since discovering Jessica's flight, Shylock smiles. It is not a pleasant expression. It is the smile of a man who has decided that if he must suffer, others will suffer with him, that if he loses what he loves, his enemies will lose what they love as well. Antonio will pay, not just with money, but with everything he built, everything that defines him. Shylock begins preparing his case, consulting with lawyers, ensuring the contract's enforceability. He wants no loopholes, no escape clauses, no possibility of Antonio wriggling free through legal technicalities. When the 8 months expire, if Antonio cannot pay, and every indicator suggests he cannot, Shylock will take Rossini Pictures with pitiless efficiency. The irony does not escape him. Hollywood exiled Shylock from the creative side of the industry, blacklisted him for refusing to betray his principles. Now he will own a production company, will control the very means of making films from which he was barred. Perhaps he will use it to tell the stories no one wanted told, to expose the industry's hypocrisies and cruelties. Or perhaps he will simply liquidate it for cash, selling off Antonio's legacy piece by piece, turning art into money as Hollywood always does in the end. But beneath the vengeful planning, beneath the cold calculations, Shylock sits alone in his office above Fairfax Avenue, clutching his daughter's letter, and weeps. He weeps for Jessica, for himself, for all the years of accumulated losses. He weeps for the screenwriter he was, the artist Hollywood murdered. He weeps for the father he tried to be, protective and loving, whose protection became prison and whose love became suffocation. In 4 months, Solomon Shylock will have his revenge against Antonio Rossini. But revenge cannot fill the apartment upstairs that echoes with Jessica's absence. Revenge cannot restore what he has lost, cannot undo the blacklist, or return his daughter, or heal the wounds that have festered for 17 years. Revenge is simply all he has left, the last currency of the dispossessed, and he will spend it completely. The August night deepens over Los Angeles, the city indifferent to the dramas playing out in offices and apartments, mansions, and modest homes. People make choices that will determine their futures, acting from love or hate, hope or desperation. And the machine of consequence begins turning, grinding slowly toward an inevitable confrontation, a courtroom or conference room where debts will be calculated and paid, where the pound of flesh promised will be claimed or refused, where the question of justice versus mercy will be decided by men who have forgotten the difference. 4 months pass with the cruel swiftness of time running out, each day bringing Antonio Rossini closer to disaster. September bleeds into October, October into November, and November into December. The year 1968, already marked by assassination and riot, war, and protest, violence in the streets and chaos on television screens, closes around Antonio like a trap sprung in slow motion. His 3 films return from their distant locations like wounded soldiers limping home from battle. The war picture from the Philippines arrives over budget by $300,000, a bloated mess requiring extensive editing to find any coherent narrative. The Mexican Western comes back with unusable footage, the director and star having sabotaged each other so thoroughly that entire sequences must be reshot on California sound stages at additional crushing expense. The Moroccan adventure film barely escapes legal seizure, its equipment ransomed from government warehouses, its footage damaged by heat and careless handling. Antonio pours his remaining resources into post-production, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. He hires editors to work miracles in cutting rooms, composers to create scores that might elevate pedestrian images, sound designers to polish dialogue recorded poorly in difficult conditions. He attends test screenings where audiences sit in confused silence or walk out before the final credits. The films are not terrible, exactly, but they are not good enough, not special enough, not the triumphant return Antonio needed them to be. Studio executives who once took his calls now have their secretaries claim they are unavailable. Distributors who expressed interest suddenly discover scheduling conflicts, insufficient screens, marketing budgets allocated elsewhere. Antonio watches his dreams die in conference rooms where men in expensive suits deliver rejection with practiced sympathy, their eyes already looking past him toward younger producers with fresher ideas and better box office track records. The 8-month deadline arrives on a gray December morning, Los Angeles experiencing one of its rare winter rainstorms, the city unprepared for weather that transforms streets into rivers and exposes the inadequacy of infrastructure built for endless sunshine. Antonio sits in his office on the Paramount lot, staring at the calendar, knowing he cannot repay Shylock the $15,000. His bank accounts are empty, his credit exhausted. His 3 films will not generate revenue for months even if distributors can be found, and early projections suggest they will lose money rather than earn it. Antonio has avoided Bassanio throughout these terrible months, making excuses when the young man calls, declining invitations to visit the Bellmont estate where Bassanio now spends most of his time. Antonio cannot bear to burden Bassanio with knowledge of the approaching catastrophe, cannot taint the young man's happiness with his own failure. Better to suffer alone, to face the consequences without dragging Bassanio into the wreckage. But when Shylock's lawyer contacts Antonio with formal notice that the loan has defaulted and the forfeit clause will be enforced, Antonio can no longer hide. The legal papers arrive by messenger, precise language detailing that Rossini Pictures now belongs to Solomon Shylock, all assets and contracts transferred immediately, all operations subject to new ownership. Antonio has 1 week to vacate his offices and surrender all company records, 1 week before his life's work passes to the man he wronged 17 years ago, when silence and cowardice seemed wiser than courage. Antonio calls Bassanio finally, his voice heavy with confession and regret. They meet at Musso and Frank Grill in the same corner booth where Antonio first agreed to borrow the money. 8 months ago, when the favor seemed simple and the risk theoretical. Now the risk has manifested into devastating reality, and Antonio must explain to the young man he loves like a son that everything has been lost. Bassanio listens with growing horror as Antonio describes the failed films, the impossible debt, the forfeit clause he accepted so casually, believing his projects would succeed and the strange condition would never matter. Bassanio realizes with sickening clarity that Antonio borrowed the money for him to finance his pursuit of Portia, and now Antonio will lose everything because of that generosity. Bassanio insists he will fix this, will find the $15,000 somehow, will not allow Antonio to suffer for his sake. But where can $15,000 be found in a week? Bassanio has spent Antonio's loan completely, living beyond his means these past months while courting Portia, maintaining the illusion of success that granted him access to her world. His new suits hang in his closet. His leased Continental sits in his parking space. His rented apartment overlooks the city with expensive views, but none of these things can be converted back into the cash Antonio needs. Portia could provide the money easily, Bassanio realizes. Her inheritance includes liquid assets worth millions. $15,000 would mean nothing to her, pocket change from her vast fortune. But asking her feels impossible, feels like revealing himself as the fraud he has been, the desperate man who manufactured success to win her. How can he confess that everything she believes about him is constructed on borrowed money, that he is not the successful producer she imagines, but a nobody who gambled on love? Yet how can he not ask when Antonio's entire legacy hangs in the balance? The older man gave him everything. First chances, mentorship, unconditional love, and finally, the $15,000 that won Portia. Antonio never asked for repayment or gratitude, never demanded anything except that Bassanio find happiness. Can Bassanio now refuse to save Antonio out of pride or fear of exposure? The two men sit in the restaurant booth, rain streaking the windows, the lunch crowd thinning around them, and face the mathematics of loyalty and sacrifice. Antonio insists Bassanio must not jeopardize his relationship with Portia, must not confess his deceptions or beg for money. Antonio chose to borrow from Shylock, chose to sign the contract, and the consequences are his to bear alone. He has lived 58 years, built one successful company, and if he must start again from nothing, at least he will do so knowing he helped someone he loved achieve happiness. But Bassanio cannot accept this sacrifice. He stands from the booth, his decision made even as fear churns in his stomach. He will go to Portia, will tell her everything, will throw himself on her mercy and pray that their love can survive the truth. He will ask for the money not for himself but for Antonio, and if Portia rejects him afterward, at least he will have tried to repay the debt that transcends mere cash. Bassanio drives through the December rain to the Bellmont estate, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turn white. The windshield wipers beat rhythmically, clearing water only for more to obscure his vision, and a PT metaphor for his attempt to see any path forward through this crisis. He has rehearsed his confession a dozen times, but every version sounds like the excuse it is, the plea of a con man caught in his own trap. Portia greets him at the door, her face bright with affection that makes his guilt sharper. She has been planning their New Year's Eve engagement party, she tells him excitedly, wanting to introduce him properly to Hollywood society as her chosen partner. Her father's friends and colleagues, the industry elite, will gather at the estate to celebrate their union. She speaks of the future with confidence that Bassanio is about to shatter. They sit in the library where they first truly talked, and Bassanio forces himself to speak before courage fails him completely. He tells her everything in a rush of confession, words tumbling over each other. He was broke when he came to audition for her, living on empty charm and fading connections. Antonio loaned him $15,000 to transform himself into someone worthy of approaching her. The expensive suits, the nice car, the upgraded apartment, all of it purchased with borrowed money to create an illusion of success. Bassanio watches Portia's face as understanding and hurt wash across her features. She says nothing, letting him finish, and her silence terrifies him more than anger would. He explains about Antonio's crisis, about the failed films and the impossible debt, about Shylock's forfeit clause that will take everything Antonio built. He explains that he must ask her for $15,000, not for himself, but to save the man who sacrificed everything so Bassanio could pursue his happiness. When he finishes, the silence in the library becomes oppressive, broken only by rain against the windows and the distant sound of the fountain in the courtyard. Portia stands and walks to the window, her back to him, and Bassanio prepares himself for rejection, for the justified anger of a woman deceived. But when Portia turns, her expression holds not fury, but something more complex, hurt mixed with understanding, disappointment tempered by recognition. She asks him a single question. Did he lie about his feelings for her, or only about his financial situation? Was the emotional honesty in his audition performance real, or was that also manufactured for effect? Bassanio swears that his love is genuine, the only truth in all the deception. Everything else was costume and prop, but his feelings for her were and are completely authentic. He fell in love with her the first moment they spoke, and winning her felt like the only meaningful thing he had ever accomplished. The money was simply the price of admission, the entrance fee to a world from which poverty would have excluded him. Portia considers this, weighing the betrayal against the explanation, measuring the lie against the love. She understands, perhaps better than Bassanio realizes, how Hollywood functions, how appearance grants access, how perception often matters more than reality. She herself has been valued for her inheritance, and her beauty rather than her intelligence or talent has been seen as prize rather than person. Perhaps Bassanio's deception, while painful, comes from a place she can understand even if she cannot entirely forgive. She agrees to give him the money, but more than that, she insists on accompanying him to confront Shylock. This debt originated in love for Bassanio, and she will not hide behind her fortune while Antonio suffers. Besides, she has resources beyond mere money. Her late father's attorney, Harold Greenberg, is one of Hollywood's sharpest legal minds, a man who built his reputation defending artists against studio exploitation. Portia makes phone calls while Bassanio watches in amazement. She contacts Greenberg, explains the situation in brief terms, arranges an emergency meeting at Shylock's office the following morning. She writes a check for $15,000 without hesitation, the amount barely making a dent in her vast wealth. But she also instructs Greenberg to review the contract between Antonio and Shylock, to search for any legal avenue that might invalidate the forfeit clause or delay its implementation. That evening, Portia summons Antonio to the estate, and the older producer arrives expecting judgment or pity. Instead, he finds kindness and strategic thinking. Portia explains that she views Antonio's sacrifice for Bassanio as the act of a true friend, someone who gave without counting cost or demanding return. Such friendship deserves protection and support, and she has both the resources and the will to provide it. Antonio, overwhelmed by this generosity from a woman he has never met, tries to refuse, to insist he cannot accept her charity. But Portia cuts through his protestations with clear logic. This is not charity but justice, she argues. Antonio lent money so Bassanio could prove himself worthy of her, and that loan directly benefited Portia by bringing them together. She is simply repaying a debt she owes, completing a circle of obligation and gratitude. Moreover, Portia explains, she has researched Solomon Shylock's history, has learned about the blacklist and Hollywood's treatment of him. She recognizes that Shylock's contract with Antonio represents more than business transaction. It represents years of accumulated bitterness seeking outlet through legal revenge. But revenge, however justified by past injuries, cannot be allowed to destroy an innocent man's life work. Harold Greenberg arrives at the estate near midnight, a man in his 70s with white hair and sharp eyes, carrying a briefcase worn from decades of use. He reviews the contract between Antonio and Shylock while the others wait anxiously, his face revealing nothing as he reads. Finally, he looks up and announces that the contract is legally binding and will almost certainly be upheld by any court. The forfeit clause, while unusual, contains no illegal provisions, no grounds for invalidation. However, Greenberg continues, there might be another approach. If they can appeal to Shylock's humanity, remind him of the values he once held as an artist, perhaps they can negotiate a different resolution. The law may favor Shylock, but mercy and compassion exist beyond legal obligation. Someone must make the case to Shylock that revenge, while satisfying, ultimately perpetuates the cycle of harm that the blacklist began. Greenberg suggests that Portia herself make this appeal, disguising her identity initially as his associate, a young attorney learning the practice. If Shylock believes he faces only legal arguments from lawyers, he will simply assert his contractual rights. But if Portia can engage him as a fellow human being, artist to artist daughter, perhaps she can reach the man beneath the bitterness. The plan feels desperate, but desperation accurately describes their situation. They agree to meet at Shylock's office the following morning, December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Though that holiday holds little meaning for the Jewish financier who has been excluded from Hollywood's Gentile celebrations throughout his exile. They gather at Shylock's office on Fairfax Avenue on a cold December morning. The rain finally stopped, but the sky remaining gray and threatening. Antonio arrives first, accompanied by Harold Greenberg, whose reputation precedes him into the small room above the bookstore. Bassanio comes next, his face drawn with anxiety and guilt. Finally, Portia enters, dressed in a conservative suit, her hair pulled back severely, introduced by Greenberg simply as Miss Porter, his legal associate assisting with the case. Shylock sits behind his desk like a judge prepared to pass sentence, his face carved from stone, his eyes cold and merciless. He barely glances at the check Greenberg places before him, the $15,000 Portia provided. The money is irrelevant now, Shylock announces. The 8-month deadline has passed. The contract's terms are clear. Rossini Pictures belongs to him, and no amount of cash can change that legal reality. Greenberg begins with technical arguments, citing precedents in contract law, suggesting the forfeit clause might constitute unconscionable terms unenforceable by courts. But Shylock counters every point with his own legal knowledge, revealing that he consulted extensively with attorneys when drafting the contract, ensuring its validity. The forfeit clause was clearly stated, understood by both parties, agreed upon freely. Antonio signed knowing the consequences of default. Antonio sits quietly through these exchanges, accepting his fate with resignation. He made his choice 8 months ago, and arguing now feels pointless. But Portia, observing Shylock carefully, sees beyond the legal posturing to the wounded man beneath. She asks permission to speak, and Greenberg yields the floor to his supposed associate. Portia addresses Shylock directly, her voice calm and respectful, acknowledging his legal right to claim Antonio's company. The contract supports him, she concedes, and the law will likely rule in his favor. But she asks him to consider what lies beyond legal rights, beyond contracts and forfeit clauses, beyond revenge disguised as justice. She speaks of mercy, that quality which cannot be forced or demanded, but must be freely given. Mercy benefits both the giver and the receiver, she argues, ennobling the one who shows compassion while saving the one who receives it. Shylock has suffered terribly, she acknowledges, has been wronged by Hollywood's cruelty and betrayed by those who should have supported him. His anger is justified, his pain legitimate, his desire for recompense understandable. But taking Antonio's company will not restore what Shylock lost. Portia continues. It will not give him back his screenwriting career, will not erase the blacklist's damage, will not return his daughter or heal his wounded heart. Revenge is simply another form of suffering, spreading the pain outward rather than eliminating it. If Shylock claims his forfeit, he becomes the oppressor he once opposed, perpetuating the cycle of cruelty that destroyed his own life. Portia's words, delivered with genuine emotion and moral clarity, filled the small office with uncomfortable truth. Even Antonio looks at her with wonder, recognizing wisdom beyond her apparent years. Bassanio realizes for perhaps the first time the depth of the woman he loves, seeing past beauty to the intelligence and compassion beneath. But Shylock remains unmoved, or pretends to remain unmoved, though something flickers in his eyes that might be doubt or might be deeper pain. He responds with his own speech, his voice low and intense, cataloging the injuries he has endured. Hollywood took his career, his reputation, his ability to practice his art. Antonio specifically betrayed him when he withdrew from that film project in 1953, choosing career safety over moral courage. And now Shylock continues. They ask him to show mercy they never showed him. They ask him to forgive debts when no one forgave his blacklisting. They appeal to his humanity while Antonio spent 17 years benefiting from the same system that destroyed Shylock. The hypocrisy staggers the imagination. No, Shylock will take what the law grants him. He will own Rossini Pictures and operate it as he sees fit, perhaps producing the films Hollywood refused to let him write, perhaps simply selling it off piece by piece for profit. Either way, Antonio will finally understand what it means to lose everything. The room falls silent, Portia's appeal meeting Shylock's refusal, like waves against stone. Greenberg prepares to argue further, but then Portia notices something in the contract, a detail she asks Greenberg to examine. The old attorney reads closely, his eyes widening slightly, and a thin smile crosses his face. Greenberg addresses Shylock with new confidence. The contract, he notes, grants Shylock ownership of Rossini Pictures if Antonio fails to repay the $15,000. About implementation, but the contract specifies nothing about the manner of transfer, nothing about Antonio's obligations during transition, nothing about treatment of existing contracts and commitments. The document is precise about the forfeit, but vague. Moreover, Greenberg continues, Rossini Pictures currently operates under agreements with multiple parties, actors, directors, distributors, crew members. Transferring ownership without honoring these existing obligations could expose Shylock to massive liability. Lawsuits from every person and company with whom Antonio has contracts. The production company is not simply an asset to be claimed, but a web of legal obligations that transfer with ownership. Shylock could spend years in litigation, Greenberg warns, defending against claims from Antonio's creditors and partners. The company he claims might become worthless before he can liquidate it, might even generate negative value, costing more in legal fees than any eventual profit. His victory could become its own punishment, a poisoned prize that destroys the winner. Furthermore, Greenberg adds, if this dispute proceeds to court, Portia Bellmont is prepared to testify about Shylock's motives, to argue that the contract was crafted deliberately to entrap Antonio, that the forfeit clause constitutes predatory lending practices. Her testimony, given her reputation and her father's legacy, would carry significant weight. The case Shylock believes to be certain might become complicated, expensive, and uncertain. Shylock listens to this new information, watching his assured victory become questionable. He looks at Portia, recognition dawning that Miss Porter is actually Portia Bellmont, that he has been outmaneuvered by a woman half his age using legal complexity against his contractual certainty. Shylock sits in heavy silence, the certainty of his revenge crumbling beneath legal complexity and strategic maneuvering. He looks at the faces surrounding him. Antonio resigned to loss, Greenberg professionally satisfied, Bassanio anxiously hopeful, and Portia calmly waiting for his response. These people have taken his assured victory and transformed it into potential defeat, used the very system he sought to exploit against his exploitation. Finally, Shylock speaks, his voice stripped of its earlier righteousness, replaced by exhausted bitterness. He will accept a compromise not from mercy, but from pragmatism. He will take the $15,000 plus interest, 20% as originally discussed before he waived it for the forfeit clause. $18,000 total, and Antonio keeps his company. It is not the revenge Shylock wanted, but it is something more than the blacklist left him. Portia writes a second check, adding $3,000 to the first $15,000, and places both before Shylock. But she makes one additional request, speaking now in her own voice rather than as Miss Porter. She asks Shylock to consider reconciliation with his daughter, to recognize that Jessica's departure came from need for independence rather than lack of love, to see that imprisoning her in his bitterness served neither of them. Shylock's face hardens at the mention of Jessica. His daughter is dead to him, he announces with terrible finality. She stole from him and abandoned him, betrayed everything he sacrificed to provide for her. There can be no reconciliation, no forgiveness for that wound. He will take Portia's money and release Antonio from the contract, but his heart remains closed to the child who broke it. The meeting concludes with grim satisfaction rather than joy. Antonio retains his company, but knows how close he came to losing everything. Shylock accepts payment, but feels cheated of the revenge that might have provided meaning to his suffering. They sign documents Greenberg prepared, formalizing the resolution, converting drama into legal language. And then they disperse into the gray December day. Outside Shylock's office, Antonio embraces Bassanio with paternal affection, relieved beyond measure that catastrophe has been averted. He thanks Portia with genuine emotion, knowing her intervention and resources saved him when his own efforts failed completely. Portia accepts his gratitude graciously, but her eyes remain on Bassanio, unresolved questions hanging between them. As they prepare to leave Fairfax Avenue, Portia does something unexpected. She asks Bassanio for the ring she gave him, the silver band with the sapphire that belonged to her mother. When Bassanio looks confused, she explains that the lawyer who saved Antonio deserves payment beyond money, deserves a gift representing their gratitude. She wants to give Miss Porter, whom Bassanio still believes is a separate person, the ring as thanks. Bassanio refuses immediately, reminding Portia of her own instruction never to remove the ring, never to give it away, that losing it would signify broken trust between them. But Portia insists, arguing that Miss Porter's legal expertise saved Antonio, that such service merits exceptional recognition, that surely Bassanio values Antonio's salvation above symbolic jewelry. The request becomes a test, though Bassanio does not recognize it as such. Portia watches to see whether he will honor his promise to her or succumb to pressure and circumstance. Antonio, uncomfortable with the tension, suggests they can compensate Greenberg's firm with money rather than personal items. But Portia persists, her voice taking on an edge, asking whether Bassanio's word means anything, whether his promises are negotiable. Caught between competing loyalties, aware that Portia saved Antonio and should not be refused, Bassanio makes the fateful choice. He removes the ring from his finger, hesitating for just a moment, then hands it to Portia. She accepts it with an expression Bassanio cannot read, something between satisfaction and disappointment, and slips it into her purse. She thanks him coolly, then announces she has business to attend to, and will see him later at the estate. Portia drives away in her Mercedes, leaving Bassanio standing on the street with Antonio and Greenberg, feeling inexplicably that he has failed some crucial test he did not know he was taking. Antonio reassures him that he did the right thing, that gratitude required some sacrifice. But Bassanio stares at his bare finger where the ring sat for 4 months, and unease settles in his stomach like cold stone. That evening, Lorenzo and Jessica sit in their small apartment in Silver Lake, a modest place with second-hand furniture and walls thin enough to hear neighbors' conversations. Jessica works as a waitress at a diner on Sunset Boulevard, serving coffee and hamburgers to night shift workers and insomniacs. Lorenzo continues writing screenplays that no one wants to produce and taking construction jobs that pay rent. They are poor and free, and the freedom tastes sweet despite the poverty. Jessica speaks of her father rarely, but when she does, her voice carries complex emotion. Guilt over the money she took, relief at her escape, sorrow over the relationship now severed, anger at his controlling possessiveness. Lorenzo listens without judgment, offering comfort without solutions, understanding that some wounds heal slowly or never fully heal at all. They receive word through Hollywood's gossip network about the confrontation in Shylock's office, about Antonio's near destruction and last-minute salvation, about Portia Bellmont's clever intervention. Jessica feels conflicted learning her father almost achieved his revenge, wondering whether her departure pushed him toward that extremity, questioning whether she bears responsibility for his increasing bitterness. But Lorenzo reminds her that Shylock's choices are his own, that adult children cannot remain hostage to parents' pain, that she has right to her own life, even if claiming it causes hurt. Jessica knows this intellectually, but feels it less certainly in her heart, where daughterly love and daughterly guilt tangle into knots she cannot easily untie. Christmas approaches, meaningless to Shylock, but significant to the Gentile Hollywood that excluded him. Lights go up on palm trees, incongruous decorations in a city where winter means 50-degree temperatures and occasional rain. Parties fill the Hollywood Hills mansions, industry people gathering to celebrate year's end and forget the chaos that marked 1968. King and Kennedy assassinated, cities burning, Vietnam continuing its grinding horror, young people in the streets demanding change while their parents demand order. The New Year's Eve engagement party at the Bellmont estate proceeds with Hollywood glamour and champagne elegance. The mansion fills with industry luminaries, directors and producers, actors and agents, all dressed in their finest, all performing the rituals of celebration and connection. A jazz quartet plays in the living room. Waiters circulate with hors d'oeuvres and cocktails. The terrace offers views of Los Angeles spreading below, the city lights competing with stars. Bassanio moved through the party beside Portia, introduced as her fiancé to people whose names he recognizes from credits and trade papers. They congratulate him with varying degrees of sincerity, some genuinely pleased for Portia, others calculating what this marriage might mean for alliances and opportunities. Bassanio plays his role adequately, but something feels wrong, a tension radiating from Portia that he cannot quite identify. She is gracious with guests, but cool with him, her smiles directed outward while her eyes remain distant when they land on Bassanio. He tries to engage her in private conversation several times, but she evades him gracefully, always needing to greet another arrival or attend to some hostess duty. The ring's absence weighs on his finger, a gap that seems to grow more significant with each passing hour. Antonio arrives late, looking somewhat restored after his near destruction, and Bassanio introduces him to Portia's guests as the man who made their relationship possible. Antonio deflects praise modestly, but Portia takes the opportunity to speak loudly enough for nearby guests to hear about Antonio's extraordinary generosity, how he risked everything to help a young friend pursue love, how such selfless friendship deserves recognition and honor. Then Portia turns to Bassanio with a smile that does not reach her eyes, and asks him to show everyone the ring she gave him, the symbol of their commitment, the band that belonged to her mother. The request lands like accusation disguised as invitation, and Bassanio's stomach drops. He stammers that the ring is not currently on his finger, that he gave it away as payment to the lawyer who saved Antonio, that surely Portia remembers requesting it. Portia's expression shifts to theatrical shock and hurt. She reminds Bassanio, her voice carrying to the attentive crowd, of her explicit instruction never to remove the ring, never to give it away, that its loss would signify broken trust. How could he surrender the one thing she asked him to protect? What value does his promise hold if he breaks it at the first inconvenience? The assembled guests watch this domestic drama unfold with the fascinated attention audiences give to compelling scenes. Bassanio tries to explain. to justify his choice, to make Portia understand he was caught between competing obligations. But his words sound like excuses even to himself. He chose to break his promise to her, however good his reasons seemed at the moment. The fact that she demanded the ring herself provides no defense. She tested him, and he failed. Nerissa, standing beside Portia, adds her voice to the confrontation. She mentions that she too gave Lorenzo a ring when they began seeing each other seriously, and she wonders aloud whether Lorenzo still wears his. Lorenzo, present at the party with Jessica, suddenly looks uncomfortable, and when Nerissa asks to see the ring, he admits with visible guilt that he also gave it away to Greenberg's male assistant, who helped with the legal research. The parallel betrayals, both Bassanio and Lorenzo breaking promises about rings, become the party's central drama. Guests whispering and watching, the celebration transforming into theater. Portia announces that she will not marry a man who treats his promises so casually, who values a lawyer's service above his fiancée's explicit wishes. Nerissa similarly declares she cannot trust Lorenzo if his word means so little. The party descends into chaos, some guests trying to mediate, others simply enjoying the spectacle, still others making quiet exits to avoid the awkwardness. Bassanio pleads with Portia, his voice raw with desperation, begging her to understand, to forgive, to see that he gave away the ring only because she demanded it, that he was trying to honor Antonio's salvation. Finally, Portia's stern expression cracks, and laughter escapes her lips. She reaches into her purse and produces 2 rings, the sapphire band. Bassanio gave her and a simpler gold ring belonging to Nerissa. She reveals the truth that she was Miss Porter, that Greenberg's assistant was actually Nerissa in similar disguise, that the entire request for the rings was a test of their priorities and their promises. Bassanio stares at Portia with a mixture of relief, confusion, and dawning anger. She deceived him, manipulated him, created a scenario designed to make him fail. But Portia explains that she needed to know whether Bassanio would honor his word to her, even under pressure, whether his promises held value beyond convenience. He failed the test, she admits, but the failure itself proved educational. Bassanio broke his promise not from casual disregard, but from complex loyalty, from genuine gratitude toward Antonio and respect for Portia's apparent wishes. The failure, paradoxically, revealed character rather than its absence. A man who keeps promises only when easy to keep is not truly trustworthy, but a man who struggles with competing obligations, who agonizes over difficult choices, who breaks his word only under extreme circumstances. Such a man might be trusted after all. Portia returns the ring to Bassanio, sliding it back onto his finger herself, and tells him she forgives his failure because she understands its source. But she warns him never to give it away again, under any circumstances, no matter who requests it or why. This second chance is the only one he will receive. Bassanio accepts the ring and the warning with solemn gratitude, finally understanding the woman he loves possesses depths of cleverness and complexity he only begins to appreciate. Nerissa similarly returns Lorenzo's ring with gentler scolding, and the party's mood shifts from drama back toward celebration. Guests who witnessed the confrontation discuss it in hushed tones, some finding it romantic, others thinking it manipulative, most simply entertained by the unexpected theater. As midnight approaches, Bassanio and Portia stand together on the terrace, watching fireworks explode over distant parts of the city, unofficial celebrations marking the end of 1968 and the arrival of 1969. Bassanio apologizes again for his deception about the money, for the lies that initiated their relationship. Portia acknowledges the hurt, but also the understanding, recognizing that Hollywood creates pressures making people into performers even in their private lives. They agree to begin again with honesty as foundation. No more costumes or manufactured success. Just two complicated people trying to build something real in a city built on illusion. The new year arrives with kissing and champagne toasts, with hope that 1969 might prove less chaotic than the year concluding, though history will prove that hope misplaced. January 1969 arrives with the strange optimism of new beginnings, that annual human ritual of believing the calendar's turn might transform circumstances and heal old wounds. The optimism proved partly justified, partly illusory, as optimism always does. Antonio Rossini rebuilds slowly, salvaging what he can from his three troubled films. With Portia's financial backing and industry connections, he secures limited distribution deals, releases the pictures quietly, without expectation of triumph. They perform modestly, losing less money than feared, and while they restore neither Antonio's reputation nor his fortune, they keep Rossini Pictures operational. More importantly, Antonio finds renewed purpose, not in chasing former glory, but in mentoring young filmmakers, using his experience to guide the next generation trying to tell stories Hollywood resists. He produces his first film of the new era in partnership with Bassanio, a small character study shot on location in Los Angeles, featuring unknown actors and costing less than $50,000. The film captures something authentic about the city in transition, about people trying to find meaning in a world that seems increasingly incomprehensible. It plays art house theaters and college campuses, earns critical praise, if not commercial success, and announces that Antonio Rossini has evolved from establishment producer to independent filmmaker, from man clinging to past to man embracing uncertain future. Bassanio and Portia marry in a small ceremony in March, abandoning plans for Hollywood spectacle in favor of intimate gathering. Antonio serves as best man, tears visible in his eyes, as he watches the young man he loves like a son pledge himself to a woman wise enough to see past surfaces to substance. They honeymoon not in Europe, but driving up the California coast, staying in small motels, eating at roadside diners, experiencing the ordinary America that exists beyond industry parties and studio lots. When they return to Los Angeles, they establish a production company together, combining Portia's inheritance with Bassanio's creative instincts and Antonio's mentorship. They commit to making films about people and subjects Hollywood ignores, working-class stories, minority voices, women's perspectives, the counterculture challenging establishment values. Some projects succeed, others fail, but all carry the conviction that cinema can be more than escapism, can reflect and challenge and illuminate the world rather than simply distracting from it. Lorenzo achieves his first real success when a screenplay he wrote about his family's immigrant experience gets optioned by a director committed to authentic storytelling. The film will take years to make, navigating studio resistance and financing difficulties, but Lorenzo has proven his talent deserves recognition. He continues living modestly with Jessica, their love deepened by shared struggle, their relationship built on mutual respect rather than possession or control. Jessica establishes her own independence gradually, Moving from waitressing to working as a script reader, using intelligence her father never acknowledged to evaluate stories for producers seeking new material. She develops a reputation for insightful analysis, for recognizing quality in unexpected places, and slowly builds a career in an industry that destroyed her father, but might yet provide her purpose. She sends letters to Shylock occasionally, reaching out despite his silence, hoping that time might soften his bitterness and allow reconciliation. But Solomon Shylock remains alone in his office above Fairfax Avenue, conducting his lending business with mechanical efficiency, taking no pleasure in the profits that accumulate in his accounts. He has his revenge against Antonio, or at least the compensation that substitutes for revenge, but it brings no satisfaction, fills no void. The $18,000 sits in his bank account, converted from Antonio's desperation into numbers on a page, meaningless abstraction. Sometimes Shylock reads Jessica's letters, though he never responds. He learns of her success, her happiness with Lorenzo, her life blooming in the freedom he could not provide because he confused protection with imprisonment. Part of him feels proud of her achievements, but he cannot separate that pride from the wound of her abandonment. To acknowledge her success would mean admitting his control was unnecessary, that she thrived precisely because she escaped him, and that admission would shatter his understanding of their relationship and his justification for his bitterness. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Shylock sits in his office reviewing loan applications when he receives unexpected visitors. Portia and Bassanio arrive unannounced, and Shylock almost refuses to see them, but curiosity overcomes resistance. They bring news that Jessica is pregnant, will make him a grandfather by autumn, and she wants him to be part of the child's life if he can find forgiveness for her departure and theft. Portia speaks gently but directly, appealing not to Shylock's anger but to his potential love for a grandchild he has never met. She describes Jessica's life, her accomplishments, her genuine remorse for the pain she caused. Lorenzo treats her well, respects her intelligence, supports her ambitions. They are building something good together, something that could include Shylock if he chooses connection over isolation. Shylock listens in silence, his face revealing nothing, but his hands tremble slightly as they rest on his desk. When Portia finishes, he does not respond immediately. Long minutes pass before he speaks, and when he does, his voice carries less certainty than before, less righteous anger, more exhausted confusion. He does not know if he can forgive Jessica, does not know if the wounds she inflicted can heal, but perhaps he can meet his grandchild when it arrives, can attempt to be better grandfather than he was father. It is not reconciliation, not yet, but it is possibility, a door opening slightly where it had been barred and locked. Portia and Bassanio leave Shylock's office without demanding more, understanding that healing happens slowly, if it happens at all, that some damage cannot be repaired, but only accepted and lived with. As summer arrives, turning Los Angeles golden and harsh, the characters of this story continue their lives, carrying their histories and their hopes, their mistakes and their redemptions. The city around them continues changing, old Hollywood dying while new cinema struggles to birth, the counterculture and the establishment locked in battles that will define the coming decade. Antonio Rossini sits in his office reviewing scripts for potential projects, aware that he will never reclaim his former prominence, but finding satisfaction in work that matters more than status. Bassanio and Portia drive through Hollywood at sunset, planning their next film, their hands intertwined, his ring glinting in the fading light. Lorenzo and Jessica prepare a nursery in their small apartment, painting walls and assembling furniture, building a future that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. And Solomon Shylock stands at his office window, looking down at Fairfax Avenue, where immigrants and their children walk past delicatessens and bookstores, where the community he belongs to survives despite exclusion and persecution. He thinks about Jessica, about the grandchild coming, about whether an old man calcified by bitterness can still soften enough to love. The answer remains uncertain, suspended between possibility and doubt, mercy and judgment, the human capacity for both terrible cruelty and unexpected grace. The year is 1969, and in Hollywood, where dreams are manufactured and sold, where appearance matters more than truth and success is measured by box office returns, a handful of people try to live with honesty and love, to build connections that transcend transaction, to practice mercy in a merciless industry. Whether they succeed remains to be written, the story continuing beyond this ending, the credits rolling while life goes on beneath the indifferent California sun.